Hey everybody, welcome to the Jaunty Mod. The Jaunty Mod. Welcome to. All right, we'll start over.
Off to a rip roaring start.
Yeah, I told you. I said I'll screw it up right away. Okay, we're gonna start over. Ready?
Yes.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Jaunty Mantis. This is a podcast about creative questions for curious gamers. I'm one of your hosts, Matty.
And I'm your other host, Jesse.
And we're here to talk about role-playing games. I guess, Jesse, this is our first episode or a bonus episode. I don't know exactly. We're just kind of trying things out. But you had mentioned that we should probably start with our role-playing game credentials. So why don't you start us out?
Yeah, I think as a positive experience for starting, we should get as neckbeardy as we possibly can and trying to take a lead on that pretty much. I got the bug as it was passed down in the elder days. Somebody's older brother had some books and brought them into the fifth grade lunchroom. And I was like, what is this thing? So I think that was like 1989. And that quickly progressed into lying on the floor with the old red box and playing the solo adventures, and I've been hooked ever since. So that's a considerable period of time I've spent on this hobby.
Yeah, and I started out, I don't remember how old I was, but I was really young, and my dad came home from a trip of some sort, work trip, and he came home with second edition. And there was a box set, and then there was like the second edition book with the guy on the horse with the sword that looked really upset, and he was like, hey, I saw these two kids playing this game in a hotel lobby, and I think we should give it a shot. And he put it in front of my brothers and I. My older brother, 2.5 years older than me. My younger brother's 5 years younger than me. So he was a really, really little kid, and we couldn't focus for 10 minutes straight, but we tried. And then he was like, oh, well, and then put it on a shelf, like all the way at the top of the shelf. And so as a kid, I would look up at it because I had a great time at least looking at the books. And, it was one of those moments where I'm like climbing up on the shelves, grabbing it off the top shelf, and then like have my blanket and a flashlight. And that was basically my first experience with Dungeons and Dragons, and then greater role-playing games after that. But you and I have a shared history going way back into Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games.
Yes, in the flower-filled fields, because you lived above a florist shop, I think, that constantly smelled like the water in that foam they put flowers in.
Yeah. I lived above a flower shop where I'm like 98% sure that the guy who owned the place was actually growing and selling weed out of the basement. Because if you actually went into the flower shop, it was like you would never buy anything in there. So I don't know how he stayed open.
Yeah, probably a front. But yeah, we met through a mutual friend who was in a college class. And I came over and frightened the bejesus out of your roommates. And we became best friends in that moment.
You frightened them by playing a lizard man. And it was a one shot. And I could barely get my roommates, and in my existing group, I could barely get them to name their characters, let alone even try to role play. And I was so frustrated. And then, with the exception of our mutual friend, and then he showed up with you and what would become another mutual friend of ours. And Jesse was like all character, like a lizard man looking for ham at this festival in this town. That was the setup.
That was a throwaway detail, because you had said like they're having a festival dedicated to their, like, I don't know, famous ham or some shit. And I was like, cool, a hook, I'm in. Yeah. So around the time I was standing up shouting, blood, blood, blood.
Yep. Yeah. And then there was the Mama T-Rex impersonation you did, which I think ended the session, because one of the other characters is playing a halfling and he got kidnapped. And Jesse's character went into Mama T-Rex mode And he did this at the table. He announced it just like from the movie. He made the roar and the motion, and I was like wide-eyed. My emoji face had big hearts in my eyes at that moment. It was like we were like best friends from the get-go, because I was like, this is how I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. It only took 20 something years.
Yes. Yes. I feel quite the same way. We are both eternal DMs, which is kind of funny. Every once in a while the stars align and we get to play with each other.
Right. That's true.
But yeah, do you have any systems that are your primary interest when it comes to the vast field of TTRPGs?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have to give Dungeons and Dragons a shout out by default. You know, it's the world's greatest role playing game for a reason. And although I wish I had a more versatile playground to kind of dip my toes in when it comes to player base, I'll never complain about D&D. Like it's paid off for me again and again and again, and created a hobby that I enjoyed, or at least popularized it to the point where now it's in TV shows and movies and stuff. So, you know, I have to give a shout out to that one first and foremost. But I think my ideal rules system, if I'm being honest, is Dungeon World, because I think it plays better to my strengths as a DM. I think I have a better improvisational aspect of the way that I DM, and I think that allowing me to, you know, empower the players through the roles and through the way the characters are made and how the game progresses, I think is just a better fit for me overall. What about yourself?
Yeah, I do love like anything powered by the apocalypse.
For sure.
I am, as Matty has called me, the king of the impulse buy. So
Yeah.
like at some point, if we set up a social media, I will, you know, put up a shelfie just so you can all catch a view of how utterly lacking in impulse control I am, and how my children will never go to university or college because I've spent it all on $60 source books. But yeah, I think like obviously D&D is the staple, the standard to go to because people know it and they have an idea of what to expect. I agree with you though. Dungeon World, more narrative play, writer's room. I'm dipping a toe into the OSR, which is not particularly one game, right? But well, I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a future episode because I feel like it lines up with some of the things that we want out of games.
Right. And then I think we both have to give an honorable mention to Shadowrun for sure.
Yes. Rest in power, Lil Amsterdam. Yes. I mean, it's the only game I know where you're still having fun while you spend 30 minutes trying to figure out what is the force value of a Mitsubishi Night Sky limousine driven by a crazed gnome gang member hitting a troll full on, doing about 80. I think we actually found an answer in the end. Like there was, but yeah. And also
Shadowrun is so batshit crazy in every sense of the word. Like not just like the concept, the book, the character creation process, the rules for chunky salsa, everything that goes into Shadowrun. You're just like, who wrote this game and like why? And then you play it and you're like, this is fucking awesome.
Yes. And I think we know who wrote that game, or at least one edition of it. But that story of vengeance will be one for a little. I don't want to step on anybody's toes if they're still in the industry. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah. Just on a side note, they do have a rules light version now called Shadowrun Anarchy, which is
Why would you play that though?
I know you're not going to get to like have to buy a bucket of dice.
I need to spend at least an hour trying to figure out how character creation works. Let alone I'll need at least an hour to make the character.
It's a very simple priority system with A through E, and you just, like some races have a higher statistical bonus, so you would have to put a higher. I can't believe I remember that.
It's weird the muscle memory we have when it comes to role playing games. Like that's one of my favorite things about meeting gamers in general. Is I hate hearing about your characters, but I love hearing about your group, because we all have this like muscle memory when it comes to the people that we play with, where you and I, we mentioned Little Amsterdam, the gnome ganger in our Shadowrun game.
I just want to shout out for Little Amsterdam. Like for those of you who have played Shadowrun, in the Shadowrun Player's Guide, there was illustration of the variant meta types, and one of them was a little bandy-legged, wiry gnome wearing like a World War I German helmet with the big spike on it, and so we put him in as an NPC in a Ganger campaign from that picture and named him Lil Amsterdam.
Yep.
So
and this is what I'm saying is like that muscle memory of that group and the people who played in it. It's more than an inside joke. It's more than a meme. It's like the culture you create with people who you play with over that long of time. So that's definitely, the inspiration behind the Jaunty Mantis as a podcast, like that name being an inside joke between the two of us. And maybe we'll reveal that at some time. But, that it really is the inspiration behind what we want to do. And I guess this is just kind of an introduction episode in general, but we have such great conversations as gamers in our selective groups or with our, our best friends, our significant others, or whoever that we're playing with. And I think that that's kind of where we wanted to go with this podcast is Jesse and I have great conversations about role-playing games. And, more than often than not, one of us is like, man, we should have hit record on this somehow, if for no other reason, so that we could just come back to it later and play it for, future generations of our combined houses. So, think of that. This isn't like serious commentary. If we do book reviews, which we'll probably do next, those will probably be bonus episodes or extras. That's not really what this show is about. And if this is kind of an episode 0, then I guess really it comes down to that phrase, creative questions for curious gamers. So Jesse, you were the one that kind of coined that. I think we were throwing around ideas for what this show was. And so why don't you explain, like, what does that mean to you? What is creative questions for curious gamers, and how does that apply to this podcast?
In a sense, like, it's just, there's the questions that everybody asks, like, or not everybody, but a lot of people will ask, and you can go directly to Reddit to, like, what is the best build for a druid? Or so on. But we just wanted to look at, like, it all spins out of our conversations we've had over the decades about RPGs. Like, what would happen if we did this? Or like, what if we could create a player character class that is a dimension, like a multi-dimensional entity or something that like summons versions of himself from another dimension, like to fight for him. And then, like, what would be the most mechanically interesting way to make that super weird? And like, I think we had come up on that one,
right?
Like,
but not just that though, right? Because then the other part of that was he doesn't just summon other versions of himself from the multiverse, but then there's a screw up mechanic that was included it, which is like to kind of like close in on the power structure is what happens when one of those other multi-dimensional yous decides it's the main one and you aren't.
Yeah, if you had failed a check or something, there was some consequence where he's like, no, I'm the real one and you serve me, and then you have to fight it out. And then I think we had come up with a little table to put in the character spread of like how that version you summoned in is different. Like, this one's made entirely of radiation. Like, so yeah. Just like those what if questions, the hows, the whys, and not necessarily like, what is a optimal character, or, like, can there even, like, we might ask, can there even be an optimal character? Like, so, I don't know if I have an opinion on that. Now I'm thinking about it. That was a terrible question, but I'm curious.
The reason why it doesn't work for us though, and maybe this is a bad example because it's too inside baseball, and I know I'm about to violate my own rule about how I don't want to hear about your character, but I mean, we all create characters that are broken at some point. I've created a broken character that could, kill everything in the first 3 rounds by himself, and or whatever. You can min-max anything to get whatever result you want, but that's not where the fun is for you and me.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely points, I think, in our gaming career where it was. I may or may not, in the closet somewhere, have the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition character portfolio that has a whole lot of characters on those green character sheets with a strength of 1800.
Yep.
Who are all named Tanis Half Elven for some reason. I don't know why. but I mean, like I was 13, and so like when you stick with it long enough, to me, like I still like to have a powerful character. I
Right.
don't like to lose, but like for me, the what makes it interesting and unique, what's the hook to the world, is sort of what I want to go. And so we try to ask questions like, can you use mechanics to build that in if you're not doing necessarily like a genre derived powered by the apocalypse or forged in the dark game,
Right.
that's like built from the ground up to emulate genre. Like,
right.
We keep trying to hack the thing that's been our lover's secret friend for so many years,
yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to what I was saying as far as like, first and foremost, I have to give D&D its propers, but at the same time, like we're in 5th edition games. We're in a group that primarily plays 5th edition, and like, with no offense meant towards the people who work on 5th edition, it's like I couldn't be less interested in anything beyond the player's handbook. I'm barely interested in the player's handbook. Like, I don't care about feats. I don't care about sub races, subclasses, features, spells, whatever. Like, it's all so it's all become such a part of the gaming DNA that like character creation is my least favorite part mechanically. It's in the story of the character and how to make them interesting, and then how to use them to advance the story and make people giggle and all that stuff. So it's like, if somebody's like, or what, we're putting a game together, everybody make a character. I'm like, hey, is there anything anybody doesn't want to play? Does anybody want me to play the healer? I don't give a shit. Like, I'll try to make them interesting in personality and in story. I don't care what his mechanics are. I don't care what his roles are.
Maybe we'll save this for a future episode, but he really does that well. Listeners at home, like,
thank you.
Can I tell one story? I'm going to tell one story.
Tell whatever you want.
We did a West Marches campaign. For those of you who are not familiar with West Marches, it is intended to like let a DM coordinate a very large group of players with a sort of hex crawl map where they put hooks out in the world, and it's up to the players to coordinate amongst themselves. Say, this is when we want to play. Can you run? We're going after this goal. So we did one of those for a little while, and he came up with a Warforged bard named Pipes, who had a pipe organ built into his shoulders. And that's like the least of what Matt does when he creates characters. So yeah, it's a pleasure to play with him and to run games with him in them. So
yeah, and it's a pleasure to also play in your games, or the rare moments we get to play together, because in those moments, like, Jesse and I will just feed off of what we are doing. It's like anything's possible, and that's the sweet spot for me, is like having that kind of leeway. Like, I say to people who have never played Dungeons and Dragons, like, if you have an ounce of creativity, Dungeons and Dragons is for you. You have people who are like, I can't draw, I'm not very creative, and it's like, some people be like, just draw a stick figure, or whatever the case may be. And D&D is or role-playing games is so much more to that. Like, it really is a way for you to express your creativity in a way that I think most people don't fully understand. And it's like, you don't have to come up with an original idea. You could, like, I think I heard about that Warforged pipe organ idea from someone else on another podcast. And I just put it in his shoulders and then added some other details to it. But that character is mine after that point, right? Yeah. The base concept I might have picked up from, I think it was Fear the Boot. I think it was somebody was interviewing on that they were interviewing on that podcast. But
did they say original character do not steal?
No, they did
well,
not.
Then that's their bad.
Right. But there's so many people in this world that I've come across who are like, oh, I wish I could be more creative. And my first response is like, you should play D&D, because that'll be a great creative outlet for you.
I'm sure there's exceptions, but like off the top of my head, just to continue that thought, I can't think of a single person I've ever seen play their first game that they did it wrong.
Right.
That they weren't just great. Like people from work who only knew about it from Stranger Things. Like, and that, not to cast shade on that. Thank goodness for that, because more people should play this game. It brings so much joy. But like every person I've ever seen play a first game, even when I am the one teaching them, has just done amazing. And I think that's another thing that goes back to why we probably like D&D is the tropes are so baked in to the sort of pop culture zeitgeist that like, you kind of know what you're getting into, even if you have never seen polyhedral die,
Right.
It's kind of there.
Yeah. And Jesse, you have such a great strength as a DM and a player of creating such a safe environment. And I think like the origin story of our friendship proves that, right? Because, when I was a kid, I was picked on for playing D&D. It wasn't until I found like a solid group, and almost every single person in that group was older than me by at least 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. Like I was really lucky to find a group of older kids that would let me play with them. But like, I mean, I got beat up in high school for trying to explain my freshman year of high school for trying to explain the difference between a hill dwarf and a shield dwarf to a football player who didn't ask what the difference of that was. Right. But like, so there's a lot of like internal, programmed, restraint as a D&D player. Like I wish I
could have been there for you in that moment, because I would have just popped out of the shadows and been like, and then there are gully dwarves as well.
Right on.
Yeah, I had of course, nerd experience, similar thing, getting picked on, but I just got picked on for being me. I never internalized it to being the one thing I did. I was just, a weird, mouthy, wordy kid. And there was nothing I could do to make it better. So I'm just going to lean into all this stuff I like. I was also super goth. And so that, that helped scare the people at the, rural township school I attended for the first part of high school, where I had my roughest phase. But yeah.
I mean, my favorite thing, because it was like Jesse was a big part of helping me be myself to a certain extent, meeting him, in my 20s and being able to see somebody just unabashedly be who they are and just strike up a conversation with someone and tell them about D&D. And I'm in the background going like this, like don't reveal yourself. And now it's popular and it's mainstream. So like, that's an unthinkable thing, but I really did come into my own as a person because of my best friend here. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, people have said to me in the past that like, why don't you do something more social? And I'd be like what? Like go to a bar? Like I like going to a bar. That's fine. But D&D is one of the more role-playing games in general. It's a very intimate social experience. It requires trust. It requires a common shared social handshake or contract. You can't get more social than role-playing games, in my opinion, which is another thing I love about our hobby.
Yeah. It's that's my social hour. That's like my outlet outside the house or in this room when we're playing online. And I think like that freedom to be yourself, that love of the game. I think when we talk about curious questions and creative gamers, like that's who we want everyone who listens to this to feel, empowered to be.
Right.
To like, hey, here is, as you said earlier, inside baseball, like talk about these games. But like, if you love that, amazing. Like do it yourself as well. Like,
right.
Say, hey, I heard this crazy thing on this podcast called the Jaunty Mantis for improbable reasons. And like, what do you think about this? So cool.
Yeah. So that's the point of our podcast. This is, the origin of our friendship. And I think our next step is to, take on a topic for, our first episode, our inaugural episode, or maybe, like I said, a bonus episode. I'm not sure. But, what we put down as far as our banter topic is Spelljammed. We wanted to work around the release of Spelljammer and address it. I know I said I didn't want this podcast to be about book reviews, but in the sense of Spelljammer being a product that's created a lot of friction, as far as I've been able to tell, it's the first 5th edition book I've bought outside of the Core 3, and
you were a super big fan and really loved everything about it. So I'm happy to hear about that.
So I kind of want to use it as an example of, if we are going to do book reviews, they will be bonus episodes, but I wanted to use it as an example of expectation. And I wanted that to be kind of the creative question for curious gamers of this episode is like, you know, what is this book? Why did it not land the way that people thought it did? And what does that mean overall for 5th edition and Dungeons and Dragons, and I think role-playing games in general? And the way that I wanted to get started with this was by looking at the, you know, I guess the overall review or blurb about it. I went onto Amazon to look at this, and it says, you know, home of the stars and gateway to the heavens. You know, the second paragraph says this collection contains everything a dungeon master needs to run a campaign set in the starlit realms of wild space and the astral sea, as well as new options for players who want to create characters at home in this fantastic setting. And then it gives these bullet points on what is in these books. And I guess maybe the reason why I'm mentioning that is because when I opened up because I got it on D&D Beyond. So when I started reading this book, I realized that this was not the product that I was hoping it would be. And I initially then was like, okay, well, what does that mean? Did I waste my money? Is this a bad product? I haven't bought anything else for 5th edition beyond the core books. They're sitting on my bookshelf. But why is Spelljammer not landing the way that it's supposed to? What did people think was inside of it? And is this a good or a bad thing?
Okay.
So
yeah,
Jesse, go ahead.
I just, I wanted to, you were going to ask another question. I was about to jump right in and ask that first kind of probing question. I don't know if it would have been possible for it to land the way that people wanted it to land, because like, if you look at Spelljammer as a whole, like obviously it was when the original came out in 2nd edition, it was, I think, during the era when TSR was still the owners of Dungeons and Dragons, and like the joke about them, it was the early days of the internet. The joke about TSR was they sue regularly. So like you put any content from their stuff up, they were going to hit you with a cease and desist and maybe a lawsuit if you persisted. So which, you know, seems perhaps short-sighted at the dawn of the internet, but that's a whole other topic. So it was a box set that took some weird Renaissance ideas about like phlogiston and the matter of space, and like put sailing boats in space, and was widely, I think, loved because of how weird it was. But I don't actually know anyone of that era that ever played a game of it. I had multiple books and box sets because I've always been king of the impulse buy. But yeah, and I remember looking through it, and the cool little cardboard ship chits. That was hard to say. That's a bit of a tongue twister there. And I was like, what is this cool mantis ship? Oh, that's the Spelljammer. And then I think there was a book about that basically said, if you go there, it kills you. Like the air, it is enchanted to make you die. But there's also a city on it. And like that was the sort of level of consistency from some really weird books with some really cool art. And then, of course, they were able to publish the space books for Kryn Space and Realm Space and Greyhawk Space and all that. And they were all just sort of weird, like this planet is full of blue halflings. And, you know, like I don't know if they were cribbing Star Trek, but I think people had a lot more of a fondness for what they remember about the setting rather than actually playing in the setting, of just like it's wild and woolly and weird. And one thing I would posit about that is that in these days where like half of the OSR is like acid fantasy, like let's make it as Uriah Heep album cover as we possibly can in the adventure. The walls are dripping blood that turns to rats when it hits the ground, and that's just set dressing for the first room of the dungeon. I don't know if it could ever be as weird and wild as it wanted to be, because it's not trying to be a science fiction game. But then it makes that claim. I know you might take a little bit of umbrage with that. It has everything you need to run a game, because
yeah, everything to run a game. I think that's the part that kind of, so I want to be fair about this. Okay. my overall reaction to this is like I couldn't have been more excited to get this book. Like I pre-ordered it for D&D Beyond, and I was really hoping that this book was going to give me some really weird shit to work with. And I think that ultimately the problem there is on me, not on them, because that was my personality and my desire for content being put onto a game that is successful now, where it's struggled in the past because they've refined what D&D is, and it is not going to be books or a book of weird shit for me to delve into. It's going to be a really like basic bare bones structure of, if you want to try to play in this area, here's how to do it. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like this was a meme that people kept referencing. And then Wizards of the Coast was like, well, we didn't plan to make this book, but can we put something together and put it out there? And it's like, yeah, but it really wouldn't be, you know, it really wouldn't be X. And it's like, well, can we make the books as beautiful as possible so that at least we have that? And it's like, yeah, we could do that.
Yeah,
and
those
I think
books are stunning.
They're gorgeous.
And like the album that they released
Mm-hmm.
with it, like when I saw the day, because there was like, I don't remember hearing any fanfare about that album. Like they're just, there's this album out today. And I'm like, what? And I just had this rise smile. Oh, I'm going to listen to this. And it's a large company is releasing an album to tie in with a game. This will be terrible. And then I started listening and I was like, this is amazing. Like, so yeah, it's aesthetically, as in an aesthetic experience, everything about Spelljammer I'm sort of in love with.
Right.
The new one. As a play experience, though.
Yeah. And that's kind of the meat of this topic that I wanted to get at. It's less of a book review and more of like, what is our expectations as gamers? You know, because my expectation, like I'm looking at a review on Amazon, where the reviewer is saying, I was expecting more than 6 sparse paragraphs for ship-to-ship combat. I'm not expecting fantasy Starfleet battles, but I was expecting something. And I read that and I'm like, you know what? I think I was expecting fantasy Starfleet battles. Like, I feel like they got the core of everything else figured out in the player's handbook. So give me something that is uniquely space or Spelljammer to work with. And that is realistically what I wanted out of that book. I wanted science fiction, sci-fantasy shenanigans and phenomenon, example planets and spaces, elaborate ship-to-ship combat rules that you can not only use in here, but you can also take to your naval combat part of your game if you want. You know, I just wanted a buffet of like really unique stuff that is only Spelljammer. And I feel like they just gave us like a framework. And I don't think they did anything wrong per se.
This feels like a weird thing to say about Dungeons and Dragons, but I don't think elaborate rules is what they do anymore.
Exactly.
And I don't think they do that in 5e, and I don't expect them to start.
Right.
Like I'm running Descent to Avernus, and I will admit that the Infernal Machine rules have more depth than the ship combat in Spelljammer, which yeah, fair critique. I mean, flying ships is the whole thing, but I think they have the elaborate rules are in the basic action economy and how combat works, and they just scaled everything up. Ships have hit points, they have armor classes, they have weapons. One of the things I wanted to look up before we recorded this, just on that weapons note and didn't get time to, is like my view of the ships and their weapons is like it's almost nigh impossible to actually do damage to another ship with a ballista that's mounted on a Spelljammer, which seems like, you know, a bit of an oversight. Like, why bother? Why have a mangonel on a turret on the deck if you're going to do 4 hit points to a ship with 430 hit points after piercing armor value or whatever it's called in 5e? Like, it just, yeah. But I wasn't personally looking for elaborate ship-to-ship combat because I do remember those cardboard chits, and it was a terrible, like unworkable system. I was really surprised they kept like air freshness values and gravity planes, which was one of the cool things I really liked about the old one. So yeah, I don't know. I think that we definitely have different expectations about 5e books.
Yeah. And I think that if you're disappointed with this book, that's fair play. If you think it's a waste of your money, I think that's also fair play. If you have expectations of what this should have been, I think that's where you kind of need to re-examine. If the product didn't deliver to what you were looking for, totally fair for you to be upset about it. I'm not going to try to take that away from anybody. But from my personal experience, it's like when they released 5th edition, I was like, the default campaign setting for this edition should be Eberron. And then I was like, no, it should be Dragonlance. Like they should, I'm sick and tired of Forgotten Realms. Like make this interesting for me. And the reason why I wanted that is because I wanted that kind of, I wanted the themes and the story and the lore of either Dragonlance or Eberron in those essential books. And what that speaks to is that's actually what I'm looking for in a role-playing game. I'm looking for that kind of depth. And that's not what 5th edition is. It's not that you can't find that kind of material in a book here or another book there, but what D&D has been in its 5th edition format has been providing to us is a foundational set of rules to play this game, a refined, boiled down version that's going to cut out this extra stuff. And it's the most successful version of the game. So obviously that's what's working. And I'm not saying it's my fault that I got a product that's not good. What I'm saying is that my expectations were not aligned with what 5th edition is. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, but I think too that in a sense of the mechanical aspects of spell jamming, we're in alignment on that.
Right.
We might have had different expectations, but the other point to bring up too is like the thing that I'm just kind of like really is that how to design a space is a box. Like it's a text box that says, look at the 2 spaces we made in the adventure module. And I'm like, so there's really no setting other than the Rock and Brawl, which is cool. And just like, this is what the Astral Sea is, and it works like this. But yeah, there's not a lot. And so I looked at those spaces to prep for this, because this was our topic for today. And what it has is like this space in a nutshell, and then like 4 paragraphs, and then it has a map and a table with how long it takes to get to the edge of system to that planet, because you got to track that with the weird mechanics they did actually give you. You got to make sure you're ticking days for your oxygen so it doesn't get fouled. But how do you do a barrel roll in a Neogi Mind Spider? You just still like, they don't tell us how to do that. I guess probably just a dex check for the spell. Okay. Anyway,
let me pose a question to you then. Like, how would that be done in an apocalypse? Run by the apocalypse, powered by the apocalypse system.
How would like a barrel roll in a ship? Like what are you trying to accomplish with it? You'd ask that question. What are you trying to accomplish that? And then I might throw around to the table. What are some things that could go wrong if they fail? Get a writer's room view on it, and people would say it. They would say, okay, that sounds like, defy danger, because you're defying danger. And then we roll the dice and see what that does to the narrative. And
but none of that is,
there's an expectation because there's so much D&D in it, because it's 5e, that there's gonna be some kind of check you could make.
Now, how would that go then? Let me put this other scenario to them. And how does that go if let's say you need to do a barrel roll and you don't have any rules for it, and you're running a Spelljammer game like right now? How do you handle that situation right now? You don't have anything else to work with.
Dex
what do
check.
you do? Just a dex check.
Yeah.
Because that's what D&D is. That's what D&D is now. That's what 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is. And this book represents that. This book is like a message from the people who make this game being like, you are overthinking this. If you're looking for elaborate ship to ship combat, you've already overthought what D&D is. And that's what this book is demonstrating to its audience. Now, whether that's the message you want to hear or accept, that's up to you. And if you don't like that message, like I'm on your side, because I don't like that message. I want, I'm reading Exploring Eberron by Keith Baker and friends. And that's an amazing book. And there's like very little mechanical stuff in it. It's all about like ideas and exploration by Keith Baker into more stuff in Eberron. And I couldn't be more pleased. It's like my favorite book right now. I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
but that's what I expect from Keith Baker.
But I think you can also expect that from some 5e books.
Like what? Which ones?
Like the adventure modules, actually, most of them have been doing a great job of that.
Okay.
I've been running Descent to Avernus. For those of you who played, they've just reclaimed the sword. It's been a very long campaign, and there's so much cool information about the setting of Avernus and all that stuff. And I haven't got to spend as much time with it as I want, and I haven't run it yet. But Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel does a fantastic job of providing setting and people and places and hooks and things to have in your game. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, has a whole section on how to make folk horror. There's no mechanics there. It's just like, I don't know, put like a rotting deer head in like a branch statue and then like have people collect eyes from lambs because it's gross. But I mean, like all that stuff, like I think that is not an unreasonable expectation from a 5e book, because that story element minus mechanics is what 5e is. And you didn't get it with Spelljammer.
Well, I mean, I read the adventure or most of it for Spelljammer, and I would agree with you there. I think they give you a very fleshed out area to work with. I guess that if I wanted to split hairs on it, it's like I'm not going to run the adventures. Like this is a topic. This is a whole other show topic. Is I don't like pre-written adventures. I've run them in the past, and I've regretted it a lot. I
love them.
And this is I think this is a great future episode. Is like us being on either side of this. But what I do want to call attention to is that in the actual Spelljammer book, for spaces, the whole layout with the astral sea, and they're like, just think of it like this. There's a pocket of space with as many planets as you want and other stuff, if you want to put it there. And then it's surrounded by the astral sea. And I kept thinking to myself, why is it like that? Like, why are you jumping from pockets of little universes to the next? And the reason that I came up with is because it's like, this is going to sound bad, but D&D 5e isn't created for me. It's not created for somebody who wants to write a multi-thousand page Bible about what this space fantasy universe is and all the different planets you could go to. And I'll just do that for myself. Like, even if we never go to any of those planets, you know what I mean? But like, I'll come up with planets and write out tons of details for them. And what this book is basically saying is like, hey, you don't have to do that. Just come up with a pocket and a couple of planets. Don't worry about what the rest of the universe is. And I think there's a level of genius to that is what I should say. And I think the miscommunication on this book, or I should say the problem with this book, is miscommunication. You know what I mean? I think if they had stylized this as this is not the bare bones, but I'm trying to come up with another phrase for it. But this is like, don't overthink this. Like, we know what you need. Here's a little bit. And if you need to go further, then here are some routes for you to take. I mean, I think they missed out a huge opportunity to create online content for Spelljammer, where they could be like, look, we didn't put this stuff in that book because that's not what we wanted you to focus on. Think of it like we wanted you to say, this is how you create a little pocket universe. There's the astral sea. If you need examples of planets for pocket universes, we have tons of them online, ready to go, created by our staff members.
Oh, they don't need to do that now because of Dungeon Masters Guild.
Exactly.
Where there are, like, I actually was looking at it the other day, like there are, I think, like easily, like the first 20 results came up were Spelljammer or something like that. So,
and this is making my point for me, is I think the biggest problem with this book is it wasn't properly communicated on what exactly it is and how you're supposed to use it. Because I think if somebody had said to me, like, this is just the simple bare bones of what Spelljammer is, just to get you through the door. And if you want more, then the community will provide. And so that's a different conversation.
Here's a thought experiment. If you were someone that had like maybe run a couple one shots or a couple adventures in 5e, and you're like, I'm going to do my campaign, and I've heard online about this Spelljammer thing, and this sounds wild, this like flying, boats thing. And so I'm going to get this set. What do you think your experience would be like trying to run a campaign if you're not running the adventure module?
What would my experience be?
Yeah, as like a novice dungeon master.
I think from a novice perspective, I think this is everything I'm looking for. It's not it's not too much. It's not overcomplicating it. It's easy to understand. I think as a more veteran dungeon master and somebody who's been in this hobby for the majority of my life, I think that's why this isn't cutting it. And I think
it's like,
go ahead. Yeah.
It's like, I don't need your permission to create my own shit because I've been doing that for a very long time. I need prompts for my ideas to help me think about some other cool shit that I can put into this. And if you were 13, like, the hours of lonely fun pouring over those books when we were teenagers, if you were 13 and like summer break had just started, like, that'd probably be epic. You'd have a binder full of stuff that would be probably unplayable by the end of the summer and ready to go. But I think too, for more experienced players, or dungeon masters or game masters, whatever.
Like 5th edition isn't made for people like me. It's made for people that want to get into the hobby and play some D&D, but aren't going to put in that level of, and I hate to say level because I'm not doing anything more or less than anybody else. It's like they're not going to put in that level of involvement into it. It's like you cannot scale up. Like, I'm old school. Like, you and I are both old school. And you can't scale on old school. You have to create a product that appeals to people who were either on the fence or hadn't considered becoming gamers before. Like 3rd edition is like my favorite version of Dungeons and Dragons out there, but it's like super intimidating. You can't get, like, I've tried to get new people into 3rd edition. They're like, why haven't we started playing yet? And I'm like, because we're still making characters, like
in the past couple of years, I've done like a D20 modern, which is built on 3rd edition 3.5 or whatever. And like, man, has it aged for me as a system.
Totally.
Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we lived together and we had a shared library of like every 3.5 book at one point.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong. I loved having all those additional feats and prestige classes and all that stuff. But, we never used it. I just liked reading it and knowing it was out there in the world.
Exactly.
And I think that's my main takeaway about Spelljammer. I've read that book and I don't know what's out there in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think if you're a new DM, I think if you got into D&D because of Stranger Things or whatever, and here's the thing is this game might be more successful and popular than ever, but it still has the same problems it did before, in the sense of there aren't enough dungeon masters.
Yeah. And the ones that are, I think a lot of the newer crowd are gonna they're just gonna love the idea of describing their, tiefling in a poet shirt with it blowing in the wind as they stand on a deck and then romance their crewmates. And that's a totally fine way to play. Like, that is not the way I want to play, but like, there's nothing at all wrong with that. And if you enjoy that, more power to you. And I kind of want to try it sometime, I'll be honest, but like, but that's not the group of people I play with because of our age and our experiences. And so I think too, probably our previous experiences with the game in different iterations had prepped us with a set of expectations that 5e products are probably not gonna.
Right.
Like I wondered when it first came out, when 5e first came out, I'm like, when are we gonna get like a campaign world book? Like, because it was just adventure modules. And then eventually the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which is not really a campaign setting book the way I traditionally thought of it.
Right.
So yeah, I just think very different conscious decision, and I'm still buying books, still playing. So I guess it's okay.
Yeah. I think that this represents part of the metamorphosis that D&D is going through at the moment, because I think that the people who are making this game are looking at this in a way where they have data that they never had access to before, especially with D&D Beyond. And I think that's why it's been successful.
Oh, I'm sure they have a full on like product managers and stuff like running it, like, you know. Yeah. So as before, they had some guys that they would call in to, you know, paint on canvases.
You know, I mean, it's like there are things that because when I told our group, because our group was all psyched to do Spelljammer, and then I had to make this uncomfortable elevator pitch to them where I was like, look, I know we were all excited to do this, but now that I've read the books, I don't want to do this. And what I said was that in order to make this happen, I'm going to have to do a lot of extra work, and that's not what I'm looking to do right at this moment. You know what I mean? Like that's not the kind of extra work that I want to put into running a D&D game. Like I'm looking for something that, like Eberron, for instance, which is what I pitched instead, where it's like, I've got books I can just open up, look at. I'm like, cool, I'm going to do this kind of adventure. It's going to start right at the end of the last war. Day of mourning, boom, plugged in. I know exactly what I'm gonna do because I've read all these books. That's what I was looking for. You know, like I'm at a part in my life right now where I'm not going to be poring over endless documents, writing that Bible for that multi-thousand page Bible about every planet in the solar system, even though that is my personality. And I guess you could, and your reaction to it was, you were like, I thought that's, you were like, I thought this book is what you were looking for, just the bare bones, right? Isn't that what you had said?
Well, yeah, because you had said, like, I'm not going to do traditional Spelljammer. Like, I'm going to have, like Eberron does, I'm going to have, like, how these subclasses work. And there's this Imperium and, like, you know, like, warlocks are different. Like, mechanically, they're the same. But here's a little background. And you had the document already with, like, 8 or 9 of them done, I think.
Yeah.
So when the book came out, I was like, it doesn't tell me what to do. I'm like, you told me you weren't going to do what they told you to do anyway. I don't understand the problem.
Yeah.
But
I mean, because I wanted to start that Spelljammer game with a huge multi-ship to ship opening scene. You know, as much as I don't like the Star Wars prequels, even though I think they're better than the sequels, like I wanted to start with that episode 3 mass space combat opening. And I wanted to really dial in and get them involved in like, this is what Spelljammer is. Like, we're fantasy in space. You know, ships are exploding, you know, stuff's flying past your head. You know, you got to get off this ship and swing onto another one. You're in space. If you miss this roll, like, have an NPC miss the roll and have them floating off, just like, you know, they're gone. You know what I mean? Like, that's like this scale that I wanted to open that game with. And so it's like, I'm looking for the rules. I don't want to have to create the rules. If I'm going to create the stuff, I want it to be the story stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, buying this book made me realize that, like, I just kind of want stuff provided for me in a certain sense. And this book is not providing what I wanted from it. And that's not the fault is in miscommunication, in my opinion. I know it's kind of sounds like a mixed message. You know, like, when I get through this part of my life with my job being the way it is and the way life is right now, like, I'll probably go back to that document and start, you know, creating stuff for it. But I don't want to have to worry about the mechanical stuff.
Yeah, I'm 100% here for that when you do that, by the way. So, and I'm sure if, listeners, if you have a suggestion for a system that does it better, don't tell Matt he wants to play D&D. Tell me, I'll read it and buy the book, and then your favorite designer will get money. So.
Well, wait a minute. Let's explore that idea, because it was the group that said let's run Spelljammer, and I don't want to. Hell yeah. Like, there was a part of me that was like, the only way I'm going to run this game is in another system. Like, I started looking for a different system, because I think that's also part of this problem. Is I've watched YouTubers comment about Spelljammer being such a big disappointment, and I'm sitting there going, dude, at what point do you stay in this lane of D&D and not start branching out into other things? Like, the system you're looking for, that space combat system, or those rules you want, or that space fantasy, whatever, I'm sure it's in a different system somewhere. Just go find it. Like, let's not get so pigeonholed into 5e D&D that we're like trying to, the modularity that they invented this version on. I think people are looking at it like it's the holy grail. Like, I'm just as to blame about this. Like, I bought the 5e hardcore mode by Runehammer Games, which I highly recommend. It's awesome. It gives you all these great little tweaks you can make to 5e to make it more hardcore and tougher and grittier. But it's like, at the same time, shouldn't I have just gone out and said, hey guys, we're gonna play Dungeon Crawl Classics?
Yeah, that's, you finally got there, Matt. You finally got there. Y'all, this is the thing I've been waiting to happen for like literally 10 years. He just got there on our first episode. It's beautiful. This podcast is magic.
There we go.
Yeah, like, let's not convert it. Let's just find a system that does it.
Right.
But then the other thing is, to our online gaming group, I don't want to teach you all to play another game. If you're listening to this, like, a little bit of shade, but a lot of love.
For sure.
Like, we still don't even have 5e down, and we ran through Tyranny of Dragons, like a whole like level 1 to 10 campaign, and we still aren't, all firing on the same cylinders on how that one works. So picking up another one. We did do. Sorry, this is a weird tangent. We did do the starter set for the Age of Sigma Soulbound, which I thought was fun.
I loved it.
So
I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have anything else to say on Spelljammed, our expectations? And
you have on your show notes no sci-fi phenomenon, which is not something I was even expecting to look for.
So this is kind of a callback to the 3rd edition D&D books, where they had like the desert book and the Frost Planet book and all that. You know what I mean? And it was like they had rules for desiccation and like magical windstorms and sun scorched damage of a magical nature, and what an oasis looked like. And that's, did we ever use that? I don't think we even ran a game in the desert outside of like trying to run a modified Dark Sun game.
Yeah, I ran a Dark Sun campaign.
Yeah, but I don't know. But I don't know.
Shout out Burnt World of Athos, athos.org. Y'all did some amazing work and still do. So
true story. But I don't know if we actually used the rules from that Desert and Sand book or whatever the hell it was called.
Yeah, we intended to, and then looked at them and were like, nope.
The only thing we pulled was the Blessed of Temetnu, which is still the greatest feat ever made.
It is. We will both die on this hill back to back, surrounded by the bodies of our slain foes. The best feat of all time in any edition of Dungeons and Dragons is the Blessed of Temetnu. Look it up.
That feat is so awesome that I will have it inscribed on my gravestone when they put me in the ground.
We were talking about getting tattoos. I think I know what my next tattoo is. It's going to be a big hippo that says Blessed of Temetnu.
Yeah, definitely. I like this idea. But
that can start generating content for our Instagram when I get the Blessed of Temetnu tattoo.
I'm in full favor of it. But that's what I meant by no sci-fi phenomenon.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So, that's
But I mean, 5e, like it's in there. It's just the exhaustion mechanic, which we rarely use. So
yeah, I think I could do a whole episode on how that's an underused mechanic that they could definitely apply to different things. But again, that gets into that same problem of stop trying to hack the game and just play a different game.
yeah.
But anyway, yeah. All right.
And again, for anybody out there mad, we're not saying that D&D is bad. We're just saying that D&D may not always do everything we want out of our play experience. And in those cases, perhaps rather than trying to make D&D fit, if we build an audience, this will be the one to go back to that like gets me canceled on the internet.
I'll do you one better. I'll say D&D is bad.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been bad. It's been good. It's been a lot of different things. Like
it's been fun being involved in this podcast, Matt. But I want to be able to be on social media so I can stay angry. And
it's been bad. It's been good. Like even fourth edition, which has been universally reviled, at least in my own anecdotal experience. There's a lot of great shit in fourth edition. Like. Did it really like stick the landing and it was like, no, there's a lot of problems with it. I think it's got a lot of good in it though. Is it my favorite thing to talk about? Yeah, if we're complaining about it, sure. But like nothing in this hobby is 100% good or bad. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this Spelljammer discussion, because it's like, it's about, what do we want out of a game? Like that game could be it could be good game as far as what you need it for. So I'll go ahead and say D&D is bad, but I'll also go ahead and say it's really good too.
Matty's opinions do not reflect my opinions. No, yeah, I get what you're saying. And I can live with it. I'm a reasonable person.
I'm an unreasonable person. That's my problem. Okay. And on that, let's wrap up this first episode of the Jaunty Mantis. I'm sure there'll be a website at some point or social media or whatever, whenever we get that act together.
Where can people find you online, Matt?
No, you can't find me online. You shouldn't. I don't want that kind of attention.
Okay.
How about yourself, Jesse?
Behind hidden doors where it's best not to look, you hear only the shrieking of the winds and the howling of the damned. Or you can also hit me up on Twitter as I have to look up my Twitter address. This is how good I am at social media. So pad for time while I look up what my Twitter handle is at JingoistFet.
There you go. As referenced on Hardy Dice Friends. That was my favorite part when they read your question. Anyway,
I haven't heard that one.
Oh, it's a good one. You should go back and listen to it. Anyway, for our next episode, what I'd like to do is take this conversation even further. And if what this book is saying to me is like, hey, here's the bare bones of what you're working with, design a space on your own or go find someone who is, that's what our next episode is going to be. We're going to design a space for Spelljammer as if we were creating a Spelljammer game. Jesse, anything else to add to that?
I'm just really excited. This is the other kind of conversation I think that Matty and I have best is like, what about this? Yeah, what about this? And we just, build a Jenga tower of terrible, amazing ideas. And
it's a very accurate description of what it is, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, this has been the Jaunty Mantis podcast. It's a podcast about creative questions for curious gamers. And if you're a curious gamer with a creative question, send it over to Jesse's social media or maybe our email address if we ever make one, or a website or whatever. I don't know. Maybe we won't put this out in the world. Maybe we'll just keep it somewhere private for Jesse's kids to watch when they're adults and so they can laugh at us. I don't know. But until that, next time, for Jesse, for Matty, keep playing those fucking role-playing games. I don't know. What's a good sign-off for
That's
podcast?
A great sign-off. Keep playing those fucking role-playing games. Do it. Keep playing them.
keep playing those fucking role playing games. All right.